Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a moment, allowing people in from the waiting room. And I'll take care of a little bit of housekeeping while we're getting started here. So I'm Lori Mulberg. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for the College of Design at the university. And I'll just be hanging out here in the background administering the meeting while you all participate. So I'm going to share just a few little kind of housekeeping details. You heard as you were joining that the meeting is being recorded, so we'll have this recording available after the event, and you're welcome to take a look or share it with others who might be interested. And we have several hosts for this series. One of them today will be managing our chat. And so if at any point you think of a question that you'd like to ask, you can just type it into chat and the moderators will help to kind of facilitate discussion in that way. If you have an interest in continuing education, either a certificate or an AIA learning unit for this, and you added that to your registration, after this event, you'll receive registration with the American Institute of Architects, one AIA learning unit, or the certificate, or both. And so I'll probably be getting that out to you within the remaining part of the week here, so you can watch for that by email. If you did not request a certificate, but you would like one for your files, you're welcome to just reply to my post-event email and let me know, and I will make sure you get that. So let's get started here. For those of you who have been joining us regularly, you'll recognize these folks. Our series hosts for the Design in a Post-Pandemic World series are Abby Asojo, who is our Associate Dean for Research, Creative Scholarship, and Engagement, and she'll be one of our chat hosts today. Tom Fisher will be our discussion host. He's the Director for the Minnesota Design Center and a Dayton Hudson Chair in Urban Design for the U's College of Design. And then Virajita Singh, who will be our second chat host today, Associate Vice Provost for the Office of Equity and Diversity and an Adjunct Assistant Professor and Research Fellow for the Center for Sustainable Building Research. Our featured panelists and speakers today are on this slide here. You'll meet them in a moment. Alex Cirillo is a trustee with the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, and he's also a retired 3M scientist with many different roles there over the years. Mary Holtz-Klautz is Chancellor and Acting Executive Chancellor for the University of Minnesota Crookston and Morris. And Teresa Spaeth is the Vaden Chair of Rural Engagement and the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the University of Minnesota Crookston. So I'm going to hand it over now to Tom, and he'll tell you a little about the series and sort of get our topic kicked off.
Great. Thank you, Lori. And thanks everybody for being here. For those of you who have been part of these webinars, you know that we've been focused on the impact of the pandemic on how we are going to be living, working, moving around. And today we're going to be looking at how it may affect how we learn, particularly in higher education, how we teach and learn. I think this is part of a series of research efforts that have been underway in our college and in my center. And I think a lot of it has to do with recognizing that pandemics, this event that we are still in the midst of, have enormous long-term impacts and essentially take things that existed prior to the pandemic and often will make them the dominant mode of doing something. And so pandemics have this effect of accelerating us into the future. And we thought it was time for us to talk about what that might mean for higher education. There are also incredibly disruptive events, as we all have experienced over this last year and a half. And we think as well, there's opportunities that come out of pandemics if one understands the nature of what's going on and the impact that they're going to have. In terms of higher education, of course, we've had distance learning, online courses. We've had a lot of flipped courses. We've been doing a lot of things in higher education that have become a kind of dominant mode of teaching and learning during the pandemic. I think the the interesting phenomenon of what we've just gone through is how quickly higher education changed. I think there's long been a sense, even within higher education, that it's a very slow-moving institution that takes a long time for there to be change. And as every faculty, I think, in every college and university, perhaps in the world knows, we were able to essentially go online, totally online, in a matter of weeks. And so I think that that also suggests that there's the opportunity for there to be fairly rapid and dramatic change in higher education. The other thing I think that the pandemic has raised for us in higher ed is this question of who are our students, who are our faculty, and why do we have a campus? And I think there are good answers to those questions, and I hope we can talk about some of that here today. But for example, utilizing the Zoom platform that we're all on right now, every link can handle up to 300 people. So there's always a question of why don't we allow people to have access into our courses to audit, for example, a lecture. If all they really need is a Zoom link, it doesn't really add any cost to those of us delivering this content. And could that be a way to make higher education more accessible and more affordable to more people? It also raises the question of who are the faculty. Faculty can now Zoom in from almost anywhere in the world. Space, their distance really doesn't matter. It's really more the time zone they're in than anything else. And so the question is, who are the resident faculty? What role do they play? And could you have a global faculty in every institution? And then finally, the question of the campus. Why come to campus? I teach a course, just finished teaching my class just a little bit before this, where I give my students a choice. And typically somewhere between 60 to 80% of my students choose to remain remote. And so I continue to teach the class by Zoom, even though I'm physically in the classroom with a handful of students who have chosen to come onto campus. And so I think we need to ask the question of what's the role of a campus? How might that role change in this post-pandemic era? And what might we do differently in higher education to incentivize people to want to come to campus and to be here in person? So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our three terrific panelists, all colleagues who are doing fascinating work. And I think I'll first ask my colleague, Chancellor Holtzclaws, Mary Holtzclaws, to talk a bit about some data points that you've brought from a meeting you were just at, as well as have all three address this question of how can we make higher education more accessible, affordable, and equitable, and what are some of the barriers to doing that, and then what are some of the opportunities as well. So Mary, do you want to start?
Great. Well, thank you, Tom. And it's so great to see everybody virtually. Someday, perhaps as we look at this, we'll see each other together too. But well, I think one of the things which we start thinking of higher education, the first thing that we really need to look at are what are the benefits of higher education? And I think we've all heard of the personal benefits of higher education, the aspects of obviously more income, less apt to be divorced, better qualities of life, But then we also, as a society, need to look at the public benefits of education. And when I do that, I'm kind of by training a business economist. So immediately I probably go to the economic benefits. But we certainly, as we look around the world and look at different nations, we understand that those nations that have a higher education attainment also have higher GDPs. And then consequently too, not only the economic value, but all the intrinsic values that come of having greater participation in your government, in your democracy, greater areas of people who volunteer. So there are many, many benefits of higher education. And one of the foundations, the Lumina Foundation, really set as the United States needs to move to a knowledge economy. And if I'm only speaking in the US and some of you are from other countries, I apologize that, but I am going to focus primarily on the impact of the pandemic in US and higher education. But the Libana Foundation has set as a goal that we as a country should have about 60% of our populace, of our 330 plus million people, who have either setting as a goal an associate's degree, a certificate, or a Bachelor of Science. So in 2015 in the United States, that number was at 48.7, with going to the goal by 2025 to be at 60%. So 2015, 48.7, 2019, 51%. So it was going to be a huge stretch goal for us before the pandemic. And we're not exactly sure what that number is, but we do know with some of the other data points I'm going to share with you, there was a significant impact and dip in higher education. So I think that we could assume that we're probably going to definitely, unfortunately, maybe not make that goal. And so just a few data points about what was the impact of the pandemic. So that overall enrollment in the United States higher education institutions in fall 2020 was down 3.4% from fall of 2019. And then in 2021, it was down 6.5%. So we're just getting our fall data points now, and we're seeing that overall the universities, colleges, higher education in the United States has been severely affected by the pandemic. And then some of the data points, these aren't exactly, and that's why I didn't want slides, because there are still data points that are in the process of being defined. But as we know, the pandemic took a disproportionate disproportionate impact on our BIPOC communities. And what it appears so far in higher education is that our Latinx population of people going on from Latinx populations is down around 14% from 2019 to 2021, 15% down for Blacks, 19% down for Native Americans who are going on to higher education. And then, of course, not surprisingly, down 33% for international students. So we significantly have also just changed again, or maybe so much work that had been done to try to be inclusive and involve people from the BIPOC populations. So I'm actually, what I'm setting here, and I'm not needing to be Debbie Downer, but I'm setting some challenges that we are going to have to be addressing with that. And then we also, I'm just again setting a little context with our incoming students. So very few of us were actually in person last year. The majority of the United States higher education was done virtually in 2020. We had on campus, as did at the University of Minnesota, but that was not generally the way it was across the nation. So in essence, what we're doing this year across the United States is we're bringing in 2 incoming classes. Yes, we had them online, but now we have to go through all of the onboarding of retaining students, because we have 2 freshman classes that are coming to us for our undergraduate. And so with that, obviously, is the greatest probability of people dropping out is between that freshman and sophomore year. So we basically have to double our efforts to ensure that our students are successful. And that taken on with what all of us have felt through the pandemic, which was it's just a huge impact on mental health, as well as individually, as well as we know the impacts it's had particularly on a number of our students and their family members. So it's going to be some long and deep of the pandemic. And then again, Debbie Downer here, but let's go down to K through 12. In K through 12, so let's look at this long term. What are the long-term aspects of the pandemic? Well, basically, we've had 1.5 to 2 years of no learning. So if we, and there is some learning, but the reality is our students have been affected. So if we are going to be those that are going to be in higher education, educating these students down the line, thinking 4, 6, 8, 10 years from now when we start to have them in college, there's been significant impact on student learning. So we are going to have to be designing and coming up with systems and ways to support these students, because they're probably not going to be coming to us at the same level of preparation that our current students are even. And I think that also provides us in higher education. It's like, what should be our roles and responsibilities to be involved with the schools to help and ensure, are they summer schools? Are they enrichment programs? What are the pathway programs that we need to be working with our K through 12 colleagues across the United States to ensure that our students are coming to us ready to go to school? And just a stat I heard yesterday, which I thought was really interesting. I was at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASCU meeting yesterday. And this is a really interesting piece there where, again, I think that oftentimes in higher education, we just, we take the student when they come to us and we, meet them where they are and we do our best to ensure there. But yet, what is our obligation to ensure that students, remember that old book, Johnny teaching Johnny to read, or whatever the title of that was? What is our obligation as a higher education? And for those of all you listening, as a society, to ensure that we are bringing our students and preparing them. A student who is not proficient at reading by age 9 is less likely to go to college. In fact, they're like so significantly less likely to go to college that their education attainment has already been prescribed. So I kind of throw that out as a challenge. I know that we're working on higher education, but we are a place where we all have to be working together with that. So again, I didn't want to be one who puts that, but I thought, let's just call it. We need to be very honest and call it and say, what are we going to do as higher education? And what are we doing that is innovative and creative? And it's going to help make up for these kind of lost 2 years with our students. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to my colleagues. I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear their thoughts on that. So
Great, good. Thank you, Mary. That's terrific. Alex, why don't we I'll turn next to you from your long perspective from being at 3M and now also being with M State. What are your thoughts about these questions?
Thank you, Mary. There are a number of things she raised that I was thinking to raise also. The goals of higher education should be very simple. Everyone who comes to us should become successful by their own definition. Successful could mean a certificate, it could mean a bachelor's degree, whatever. Everybody has a different learning style. It's important to identify that learning style, and it's important for the universities and colleges to be able to deal with those learning styles and provide what's necessary for the individual. All graduates really should become load-bearing members of society, and that should be our goal. Everybody who graduates from our institution should become a load-bearing member of society. And basically, institutions have to appreciate their role in solving community problems. The students, the faculty, the partners of the universities and the colleges, they should see themselves as a role that basically provides people to solve society's problems. So if we focus on those areas, really, what does the school have to do? What does the institution have to do? We have to make sure that our curriculum are updated. Also, and our methods are good, that we are able to teach. We don't want to be excluding people, we want to be including people. So to judge the value of an organization, of a university or college, you don't judge it by the number of people who don't get in. You judge it by the people who do get in and how well you train those people. The second thing is we need to assure the availability of adequate tools and technology. The tools are changing. We now can meet anybody where they are. Just about everybody has access. Not everybody obviously has access, but just about anybody can have access to a college or a university. But the question is, can they learn in the mode that we are teaching? And we're going to have to start to see a lot of research in that area. You know, how many people are better off now that we're on Zoom, in the Zoom world, than they were face to face? Some people learn that way very adequately. Other people can't learn that way at all. So we have to basically identify what's necessary to change those methods. What we're doing at Mint State, there's a program on developmental education. So anyone who comes in who is not prepared either in English or in math, It used to be they had to take English and math classes first and add that to the burden of their degree. What we've done is we found a way to basically teach the developmental part of it as we're teaching the courses themselves. So the first courses they take are developmental in the sense that they're learning how to learn, and they're learning what they're not prepared to bring and we thought they would have brought. But we're also including that in the lessons as the lessons are created. And what we found is about a 15 or 20% increase in retention for those folks in the second year. And Mary said that we lose them in the first year. We see a bigger retention if we give them those kind of developmental programs. So make the developmental teaching part of the regular teaching and make sure that people can accept it. So I'll stop with that, but those are some of the ideas we're working on.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Now, Teresa, you've been doing a lot of work for years around innovation in the higher ed space. So do you want to speak a bit about some of the work you've done and some of your thoughts about these questions? Oh, you're muted, Teresa. Yep.
It won't let her get off mute.
You're permanently muted here. I hope not.
I'll let Teresa, while she's trying to
Okay.
figure out her technology, maybe speak a little bit more. And thank you, Alex, for providing some really concrete and specific ways that we're trying to help and make a difference with students and student success. We at the University of Minnesota Crookston also have an online program, and have had this online program for 15 years or so. And one of the things which I think is really important for us as we look at our online program, first of all, is recognizing that as if we as a nation are going to reach that attainment, we have many people who started school and then life happened, for whatever reasons. And so I'll just share with you a few stats about our online students. Their average age is 32 years of age. Very few of them, I think it's less than about 25, 30% actually even qualify for Pell anymore. They have used up all of their federal eligibility. And they also are actually they're very interested. We've done some Noel Levitt surveys with our students. They're a completely different demographic. They're interested in not the experience, but they're interested in achieving the degree. So instead of we recommend they don't take very many credits, and they're coming in and wanting to take 6, 9 credits because they're very goal oriented towards achieving that degree. But most of our programs, not all of our programs, but most of our programs are asynchronous. So that means that they're not in a live one-on-one with their professors, but they're coming in. And so when we start to design and think about how do we meet our students where they are, a couple of things that keep to mind, and Alex touched on a few of these, and I'd like to expand a little bit more. One of those is probably what I would say is flexibility for our students. We need to figure out how to be much better at giving them credit for work experiences. Giving them then also, and our professors do a good job, but not everybody understands that you teach to a 32-year-old differently, or a 42-year-old with 15, 20 years of experience differently than a 17 or 18-year-old. So how do you honor in all of our instruction, how do we honor and respect those life experiences that our students bring to them? And then also recognizing that, and this is, I see that Teresa is now available to speak, but we're actually looking also at how do we go design the curriculum in a way that, particularly for our non-traditional students, which quite honestly, that's a huge opportunity for us as a nation to make significant impacts on achieving our 60% goal, is to go find those students and help them on the road to completion. But as we work with our students then too, it's like, how do we ensure their success? Just like Alex was talking about some of the strategies that Penn State has used. It's like, and we have as one of our University of Minnesota goals, it's called, we said, meeting students where they are. We recognize that each one of us comes with some many wonderful assets, and there's probably some areas where some of us are not stronger. So how do we meet our students where they are, guide them and help them see success? Success begets success. So if they can start out in a successful role, they will be a more successful student, and our data points prove that. So we as higher education people and all of you who are great at design, help us think about how do we do this in a way that we're going to ensure success for our students. Since
Great.
now Teresa is unmuted, I will let her
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, and great, Teresa,
Thank you, sir.
that you could join us via audio here. So go ahead.
Thank you so much. You know, I think about the question of accessibility and equality. During the pandemic, and just slightly before then, in my role, I focus on issues of rural communities and rural education. But I also have a tribal college that I kind of end up being the dean every semester for, as they search for their own for permanent folks. And I think about the experience that I had with them going through the pandemic, from the time that we realized that, oh my gosh, they're going to have to go online, they can't have in-person courses. What did we experience? What did we have to deal with? And now that they're coming out of the pandemic, and frankly, a tribal college is getting access to more cash and more opportunities for grants and building than they've ever had before, right? And I think about, what did we learn? Well, one thing that we learned was the importance of the campus to the tribal college in ways, you know, a lot of us assume online gives better access, but when you're in extremely rural areas, there's not great internet, right? And maybe it's getting better in broadband, but some of what you do is you go to school for community because you are dispersed. And so we learned things that were very critical, like we're starting to ask the question, what is a family-friendly campus? So one thing that we learned was that for the average age of a tribal college student is 33. Most of the time they have they have children of their own, and they have other needs like food sovereignty, or, you know, access to food, that, you know, a grocery store is 30 miles away, that type of thing. So we realized two important things. One, the average student that was going to the tribal college was depending on daycare or for the kids to go to school during the day. So we realized that the importance of the daycare center that's on site was critical, because if they needed time to study or they needed time to meet, you know, to go to class, the fact that they could take a bus and get to our campus of the tribal college, plus right on the same grounds there was Head Start and the daycare center, the higher the probability was that they would attend. We also realized that a healthy meal was very important, because a lot of these folks came to campus because that's where they got their good food. And that's where they accessed their good food also for their children. So in the process of doing what we did, we actually delivered food boxes and things like that when they had to go online. But as soon as they could open the campus back up, we did have that. In terms of instruction, one that we didn't anticipate that was interesting was that it turned out that the flipped classroom was more popular, and students performed better in that setting than they did in the traditional setting or the Zoom setting. And the reason that is they were telling us that they could they could watch their lectures at night after the kids went to bed, and they did whatever they needed to do, and that they had community when they could come to the tribal college and they could work with other students, and they had a TA, you know, a graduate assistant that would help them do their homework. That actually raised the grade point average. We were expecting people bombing out and a lot of terrible things to happen, and actually the grade point average went up once we were able to do flipped classrooms, because they were more involved. And then they were able to take their children, even if they were out of public school, there were facilities available that they could have different age groups of children where they would get access to food, and they would have access to some kind of assistance of their own for their own homework. So when I think about that experience, then I think about accessibility, I think about, what does a family-friendly campus look like? Is it that you think about going to a large campus where you can't park, or you have to park in a parking garage and walk a mile to get to where you need to go? Well, if you're a parent, especially if you're going to school part-time, you probably can't do those kinds of things. So what does it look like, or how do we create an environment that's family-friendly for older returners? So I think in the terms of the lessons that we learned at the tribal college, it was that the facility was far more important than we realized. and that online wasn't going to answer all of the issues. So that's one thing that I think I see is changing. Another thing I think is experiencing, Mary touched on this, so many of students have burned up their Pell grants once they, especially if they're a returner, and a lot of folks are returners, especially in those types of underserved communities, they may have already burned up their Pell. So how do we deal with that? But there's also the issue of the amount of money you can receive in grants and Pell eligibility and student loans is based on the institution's cost of attendance. And every institution out there has a different cost of attendance, but I sometimes wonder, it's based on a traditional age student. And if you have dorms, it's based on the cost of the dorms and buying the boarding package and all of that. But if you're a returning student, or you're driving to campus, that's not inducing, that doesn't help you get through college. So I feel like sometimes we should be looking at the cost of attendance differently, or maybe there should be a married cost of attendance. We have different kinds of taxes, filing. Maybe we have different kinds of Pell eligible filing or FAFSA filings that are not just based on your parents, or not just based on the traditional age student. Those are some things that I found out with, my work with the tribal college, but one in general, and Alex, you're going to cringe because you've heard me say this most recently. We've been working with curricula, and what Mary touched on this, on being applicable. Adult returning students, they want to be able to do something that they can see immediate results on. And sometimes I wonder, should we be re-examining our assumptions about general education? In some cases that hasn't been examined since the 80s or 90s, and not that liberal arts are not important. I think they all are. I came from a liberal arts background, as I'm sure many of you did, but are we looking at them through the lens of modern society? And are we considering what we require as general education through the lens of how things will have changed because of the pandemic? Those are the musings that I have as I work with my tribal college, and then I work with other rural communities on their interest in higher education.
That's great, Teresa. Thank you.
I mean, just two.
Go
two
ahead,
quick
Alex.
things.
Yeah.
In terms of giving credit, we also give credit for people in military. So we have an equivalence in terms of your experience in the military and what that turns into in terms of credits. And then the other thing, what we found is transportation is important. Depending on the circumstances of the student, if there's a problem with transportation, that literally could take them out of their career. Mm-hmm. So we have funds that are available either for free or for very low loans for people who have transportation problems, and they can basically just go to the school itself, and the food shelves as well. We will feed students and the kids.
Now, all three of you have really talked about innovative ways to rethink higher ed, to make it more accessible, to bring higher ed to where people are, connecting to K-12, as you talked about, Mary, or out in the community, Alex, or to tribal communities, Teresa. And, as I said at the beginning, we've seen how quickly higher ed can pivot if it needs to. But what are some of the barriers to making some of these changes? And how might we incentivize, particularly the faculty, to be more open to some of these new ways of delivering higher ed? Any thoughts about that?
One of the comments I'll make, a barrier, is policy. And I think it's really important that all of us are involved in the policy issue. For instance, when our students received the first tranche of CARES money that came, the on-campus students were eligible to receive the direct disbursements, but the online students were not. So that was, and it just one of those glaring, like, are you saying that online students are not affected by the pandemic, that they too didn't encounter that? And it was just one of those, it was so transparent to me. It's like, why weren't we thinking about all of our students and helping that? The other part too are some of those policy issues that Teresa's talking about, the ones about what does our curriculum look like? What does our state of Minnesota, for instance, require? Why are some states provided more flexibility on curriculums? Why do some states do a better job of getting more people, for instance, into teacher education or nurse education? So I think we need to really hold our legislators and maybe help our legislators, because oftentimes I don't think they even understand the implications of policies that were maybe back in the 70s and 80s for different reasons and different situations and economic situations that we have today. So that's one where all of us need to work together to ensure that both our federal and our state policies really reflect the needs of our workforce with that. So that's one of the barriers. And then an aspect you talked about, I mentioned really quickly, is faculty. And oftentimes I think too, our faculty also want to be creative and innovative, but yet then there are sometimes institutional policies and things which prevent us from doing that which we need to. So I think part of that is just, let's recognize it, let's call it, and then let's figure out, as we all collectively can be, solutions that are going to work. Because as I said, and I will let my colleagues talk a little bit more about their perspective, but policy is one that just came to mind. It's just like, oh, it's a glaring piece that we can change, because that we definitely have the ability to affect that outcome.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mary. Alex or
I think
Teresa?
I think also point of view. This may be a little more subtle, but if a faculty member or an administrator or anybody at the institution feels that the institution itself is the end for that student. In other words, once I've got them a degree, it's over. I don't need to worry about it anymore. Really, the issue is you're preparing people for society. And you should be looking at your institution that way. The institution should be solving society's problems, either by providing workforce or providing intelligence. And if you look at the world that way, then you're more likely to do the things you need to do to get people to graduate and to basically be, as I say, load-bearing members of society. If you have that point of view, you change the way you act.
That's great. Teresa, any thoughts?
I think in terms of faculty too, Alex just raised a very good thing. We tend to look more at the future at being problem solving oriented. And if people are going to be load-bearing members of society, I think that we need to think more transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, whatever term you want to use for that. But I wonder, I was listening, Mary and I visited a dean at a private school yesterday, and he was talking about faculty and the fact that on his campus, it's an urban campus and people are in suburbs. So the faculty go home at 5 o'clock and they don't interact, which is very different than like he came from Houston, which is a very small community, and people tend to interact. So I wonder in the future, if we want faculty to change, maybe we have to figure out how do we provide more opportunities for transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary work. How do we get out of the laboratory, a historian into the laboratory, or provide some type of mechanism that there's more interaction outside of a discipline? And I just hope that makes at least a little bit of sense. But we know that when you instruct faculty, their entire system is based on the discipline that they're studying in. So they are very deep in that and not necessarily wide. But for the future, I think it might need to be, how do we open that horizon up and make it more transdisciplinary for faculty?
Yeah, great. Well, good. So for those who are in our audience, we also want to hear from you. And so we're going to start our breakout rooms. I think we'll have 2. And there's a place where you can take notes on slides, and we'll put that in chat. So introduce yourselves. You might want to choose somebody in your group to take notes, and then choose perhaps somebody else to share out the conversation that you had. And what we thought we'd love to hear from you is, what do you wish you would have had available in your own college education, given the technologies and platforms that are available now? In other words, what about what's happening now do you wish you had? And what changes in higher education do you think would be most valuable to students, employers, and the public? So we thought those would be something that you would all find of interest. We certainly will find your thoughts of interest to us about that. And so why don't we go into breakout rooms, and then we'll be back here a little bit around about 2 o'clock or so. And then we'll have report outs, and we'll be done by 2:15. So Lori, why don't you start the breakout rooms? And
The time?
Well, welcome back. I know our group had a good conversation. I assume the other group did as well. Really appreciate everyone's engagement in this topic. So let's see, who wants to report out from the group I wasn't in? I'm not sure who is in that group and who wants to report out from that one. And then Nina from our group is going to report our conversation.
So Tom, would you like me to try to share the screen?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, that would be,
Thank you.
sure.
I'm not sure our group took notes, so we may not need to. We were negligent on that end.
Let's see. I might have to try again, but in the meantime, I guess whoever is going ahead.
Who is going to? Well, okay, go ahead. There you go.
Is can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Great. So let me just. Oh, is someone else sharing? I can't tell.
Well, I see it on the screen. Your breakout room
Okay,
too.
it's probably. Yep. Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm sharing it, Rajda, but go
Okay,
ahead.
sounds good. Can you see it now, though?
We can. Mhm.
Okay. So we could go, did anyone else take notes? Let's start with breakout room 3, and it was Teresa and Abby and Judy and Madeline and Nanette. So would you like to speak to what was discussed?
Judy, you had quite a bit to say. Do you want to kind of debrief on your thoughts? Or I can certainly share. We talked go ahead, Judy, go ahead. No.
Teresa, I think it would be nice to get your summary view of the conversation. And if I need to chime in, I will.
Absolutely. I have no problem with doing that. We talked a lot about the applicability of higher education. We went down kind of a path talking about what's the future look like in credentials. I asked the question specifically. We had conversations around certificate programs, and that how in the workforce, a lot of students come out, for example, in accounting, and they don't have a lot of experience auditing. So therefore they need new education or more education to be able to do their job. So maybe the employer is looking for the soft skills or a different set of skills than the actual knowledge. But then I asked, we were talking about the question of, would you hire that person if they didn't first have a bachelor's degree? So what comes first? Do you need to have a bachelor's degree to get into a firm and then the firm teaches you? Or does higher education need to somehow pivot in what they're doing? So we talked about some of those kinds of things. We also talked about, we love the concept, Alex, of the load-bearing citizen. And what does that mean? We had a conversation surrounding what does it mean to be a load-bearing citizen, and what do you have to learn in college to be able to do that? And is it more than just checking off boxes? And do we have more of a background, what are the things that we need to learn? And that conversation led into, is it a 4-year degree that's important and affordable? For example, if you're taking an engineering course, you have very, very little room for electives. So you might not be able to explore some of these other things that you'd like to explore in a 4-year degree program, or you may need to get out financially for certain reasons. And so maybe you don't get this rounded experience that you're looking for, but what does that mean for the future? So we were kind of, in many different, one thing led to another, but it was quite a vibrant conversation on, I think drawing the conclusion that higher education, for the most part, we do pursue it to lead to a career and to meaning in life. And if we are doing that, are we doing the best we possibly can to create that load-bearing citizen of the future? How does that sound to the rest of you?
I am sorry, I didn't get to meet you in our group. I had a student come in. I'm in health services, so I had to zip out, but I
Oh,
do
yeah.
have something I wanted to add. If it's
Absolutely,
pertinent.
Nanette. Yeah.
So just listening to Mary talk, and you know how she had said that just even as 9-year-olds, if we don't catch them early, you know, we already make a difference in if they're able to attend to college. You know, I'm thinking about what can we do to help prepare the students before they get here, right? And I know, you know, there's a lot of colleges that have PSEO, but I think the collaborative piece between, I've heard there's friction a little bit between high schools and college with the funding and budgeting and pieces. And so I know some high schools actually don't promote post-secondary, you know, right, the PSEO program. And it's like, I think that's a bridge that we're missing out on and need to develop better. And how that is, I'm not exactly sure, but I had, and again, I think some of them that is partnering with the technology pieces too. Like in our high school in Crookston, you know, last year they gave distance learning, and my child ended up doing that, and he gained a tremendous amount of skill from being able to do that. He was 13 at the time, 7th grader, and so I mean he was built in, you know, the problem solving, how to figure it out, how to organize, time management, just a lot of skills that he gained just even at that age to figure it out. And I had a student from college that had come in and said, you know, he was struggling with some of the online courses, you know, again, kind of those same pieces that my 13-year-old was starting to figure out, where all of a sudden now they're in college and they don't have that skill. So I think it's working with the schools to, again, now that we've had a little bit of a bridge into what technology has for us, I really feel that that is something that the schools and higher ed need to work together on. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. One other quick thing I want to add before I pass it on, Tom. We talked quite a bit about the campus itself and the importance of the campus to be a respite for people to go to be able to reflect and have time for mental health, if you will. And also in the future, we think it'll be a good place for community-based projects.
Great. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, should we go to room 2?
Sure. So room 2 is, I'm not being able to advance my slide for some reason. Okay, let's see if I can now. Yep, there it is. So anyone from our room willing to, I think Andrew said he would and others would chime in.
Hope so, yeah. Hi, I'm Andrew Caddock. And it's interesting, Teresa, hearing you describe your breakout room discussion, there's a lot of overlap or focus from different, on the same topics from different angles in our discussion. And at least 2 of us have been through a professional education and design, and so we came at it from that perspective. So I think all of our discussion combined the 2 questions for sure. It sounded like more cross-discipline collaboration. We wish that would have been possible in our college education, and thinking ahead to what changes and what will be more valuable. Similarly, in my experience more than 20 years ago, and our discussion was similar, there was focus on specific technical skills, especially you know, computer programs, things like that, where you were by definition in a silo, learning a very specific skill versus learning to learn was one of Raj's terms, or in the future, thinking about those computer applications or any skill you're learning as a platform for collaboration, as a platform for service to society. I like the metaphor of the load-bearing citizen. I think that's fantastic. I use the word cultural competencies as a critical component of any higher education. I think Mitch used a better term. I'll let him bring that to us. And Rajendra used a great word, permeability, and that relates to how students, what students learn, where they learn it, but also I think how departments, colleges define tenure our tenurability, awarding tenure for their instructors. So any kinds of structural changes in any of those categories that allow for more real world collaboration that is in service to society. That's what I heard our group talking about, hoping for the future. But I know I didn't capture it all, so I invite others to jump in.
Sure, I could just jump into what Andrew was saying with my piece. You know, he and I were mentioning that, well, and he said we've become too polarized, and I'm just surprised at how I wouldn't say gullible people are, but how they just align their thinking with what they can read. And for me, we're really lacking. If truly the benefit of a 4-year liberal arts degree is having quality critical thinking skills, we lack being able to teach our students, you know, about false logics, false narratives, and really to embed that into really all of our classes, you know, to teach students, you know, what is a false logic, how to interpret things and look at things and not just take them at face value.
Any other additions, Amanda or Alex? No. Okay, so over back to you, Tom.
Well, as I said, our group had a great discussion, but we didn't take any notes. So we're going to depend on Nina to convey all the things we talked about. So go ahead, Nina.
I'll do my best. So I think a spring point might be pandemic feedback from students who, let's say, distilling it down, said, keep the best of technology, but we're tired of isolation and we want to get together more and we want more active learning. We want our hands to get into things. And so I think when we talked about how higher ed can teach as well as possible, I think we touched on probably 3 things. Pedagogy is certainly one of them, technology, and then physical spaces. So on the, let's say, pedagogical side, which also ropes technology in, we talked about trimodal learning, which is having students there live, having at the same time online students live so they can all talk with each other, but also recording it so that students have access to stuff asynchronously. We also talked about the importance of being able to reconfigure spaces so that instructors who want to engage different ways of learning aren't limited by the spaces. You know, we talked about a chair with storage underneath on wheels, like how much that can add to flexibility. And we talked about the idea of campus being an ecosystem in the sense that there might be storefront spaces that could be specialty maker spaces, it could be simply computer labs, to bring them to where the community is, so that especially for the remote learners who often, I think, struggle with connecting, mental health, distractions in the background, have a hub, are able to start engaging maybe with their hands, things like that. We also noted that post-pandemic is a real opportunity for flipped and high flex trimodal learning, because I think one of the stumbling blocks has been that it's so hard for instructors to build essentially a whole remote course simultaneous to a whole live course. And now that we're coming out of the pandemic, many instructors have that remote course under their wing. And so they are set up to do flipped learning. They're set up to do high flex teaching. And we hope that that will happen now while we have this opportunity. And then we also mentioned that we could look at the pre-K to 12 model, who have been experimenting so much for several decades now, that there's a lot to learn in how they've put spaces together for that support different types of learning, from passive to active didactic to demonstration to maker spaces, et cetera. And, can we, I think students coming from that system to higher ed are often looking for, where's my makerspace? Am I going to have cross-disciplinary? Because they're used to that in the K-12 model. Let's meet them. Did I miss anything?
Oh, that was great. We did talk about the role of the in-person on-campus experience too, and the idea of creating serendipitous kinds of interactions and using the campus as a kind of memory device where students learn in different places, not just always going to a classroom, but using the entire campus as the classroom. Well, I think we're out of time. I see Lori back on screen here, and this was a terrific conversation. Mary, Teresa, Alex, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and for everybody for your participation in the breakout rooms. So, Lori, should I turn it back to you?
Sure. So not a whole lot I need to share. For those of you who came in a little later, if you're waiting for continuing education certificates or credit with AIA, I'll take care of that this week. And if you didn't ask for it when you registered, I'll just reply to my email after the event. I'll be sharing resources like the ones you see on the screen so that you can take a look at those. And you can watch for the rest of the series coming in the new year. So this is the last of our 2021 discussions, and we're really happy to have you join us today. We look forward to seeing you again in the winter. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you all.